My name is Andrew Geary, and welcome to Seismic Sound Off, in-depth conversations in applied geophysics. For this episode, I speak with Satchidananda Rath and Soman Chacko on April's The Leading Edge, highlighting the recent oil and gas developments in India. First, Mr. Rath gives us an overview of the current geophysical activity in India and where the next advances might come from. Then I speak with Dr. Chacko, highlighting a few of the 8 papers published for this special section, discussing techniques and geophysics utilized in prolific and unexplored basins in India. Mr. Satchidananda Rath is an upstream petroleum professional with 36 years in oil and gas exploration, drilling, production, and national and international exploration project management. He is a current member of the Petroleum and Natural Gas Regulatory Board in India and retired as Director Operations from Oil India Limited. Dr. Soman Chacko is a consultant geophysicist with over 36 years experience in the upstream oil and gas industry. He worked for the Exxon Corporation for 33 years before retiring. After retiring, he was with Kane India Ltd. As chief geophysicist for 3 years before becoming a consultant in Houston. His interests include seismic acquisition, processing, interpretation, and quantitative seismic interpretation. To read this month's special section, visit library.seg.org. Subscribers can read the full articles in the SEG library, and everyone can read the abstracts for free. Now, for our conversation. In the introduction, you, along with Dr. Chacko and other co-authors, you state that 19 of the 26 of these known sedimentary basins in India are not adequately explored or mostly unexplored. How does this particular special section set out to reduce that number?
You see, out of the 26 sedimentary basins, 7 have been explored, and these are considered as category 1 basins. And for these basins, there is hydrocarbon reserves is there, additional production potential is there. As far as the other 19 sedimentary basins of India are concerned, in some of the basins, there is very little scanty data is there. And one of the papers which talks about the west coast of India, and especially where the Deccan troughs are really covering these Mesozoic sediments, that paper offers a futuristic exploration scenario. And in that area, there are enough evidence in near future to bring these basins, especially Kerala Konkan and also the Deccan troughs less basins, to move to this category 1 basins, which are 7, and maybe it will be 9 in future. As far as the 19 basins where work is very less, the government has taken a ambitious plan of acquiring about 50,000 plus line kilometer of 2D seismic spread over about 19 all over these basins where the data is inadequate. Based on this acquired 2D seismic data, which are basically reconnaissance, after processing and interpretation, depending on the prospectivity of those areas, we will have parametric drilling, and after parametric drilling, these will be followed by 2D and detailed 3D seismic, and then these basins can graduate to the category 1 basins. I think that is what is proposed as far as the Indian basins are concerned, moving from category 2 to category 1.
What do you see as the next advancement for oil and gas in India?
What I see as far as the next advancement is concerned, especially when we are talking about the existing basins and also the existing reserves, one of the major things which is going to come is the average recovery of Indian reservoirs is only around 30%, whereas the global average is around 40%. So based on the enhanced oil recovery methods, where seismic is going to play an important, especially 3D and 4D is going to play an important role to complement the geologic and the engineering side. So there, the geophysical angle is really going to play in terms of new 3D seismic, 4D seismic, and also spatial processing, where we can really image the existing reservoirs, which were maybe imaged in parts few years back. The technology was not very good, and that seismic processing technology has really improved. There is also one thing is that there are all in India, most of the reservoirs, they are below 3,000 meters, sometimes 4,000 meters. So especially thin sands pose a major challenge as far as the imaging is concerned. And you can see there is one paper talking about this. So I think more and more work needs to be done in imaging the thin sand. And one more thing is there is a belt of Soman, that is what the compressional belt on the eastern part of India, and also the frontal belt of Himalayan fold belt. And the imaging the thrust belt and especially the sediments below the thrust is a challenge. In some places it has been solved, but I think a lot of geophysical work, especially PSDM and PSTM, both needs to be done to image those sedimentary basins. Then only the success can be moved.
Well, thank you for spending your evening with us a little bit. And thank you again for your time.
Thank you.
Okay. How are you doing, Soman?
Good.
Most excellent. Well, let's dive in. Production from fractured basement reservoirs appears to be of increasing interest in India, and 3 of the 8 papers explore this topic. In particular, Deepa et al. Adopted a workflow that helped optimize well locations in the Kaveri Basin. How does their work contribute to effective field development in the basin?
Yeah, well, there actually are 4 papers in this section that cover the topic of fracture characterization of tight reservoirs. 2 involve basement reservoirs. 1 is on volcanic reservoirs and another on a tight carbonate reservoir. So clearly there is greater interest in exploring for and developing tight reservoirs in India at the moment. Now, the goal with these tight reservoirs is to identify the locations of natural fractures within them, ideally fracture swarms or connected fracture networks that would provide the best permeability for fluid flow within the reservoir. One thing that these papers have in common is the use of high-end seismic acquisition and processing techniques to identify these fractures, which are very tough to detect in conventional seismic data. Also, optimal production from a tight reservoir requires an understanding of the in situ stress state in them, because that dictates the design and the trajectory of production wells that we place in them. Now, to the specific paper by Deepa et al., this is a good example of these concepts. It describes a comprehensive workflow to build a reservoir model for development of a recently discovered fractured basement field in the Kaveri Basin in southeastern India. Their workflow integrated a number of sources of information, including geophysical, geological, petrophysical, and geomechanical. So by integrating these disciplines, they were able to build a reservoir model that captures the locations and flow characteristics of fractures. The model explains why some early wells in this field are producers, while others are dry, and new wells drilled using their model are now successful producers.
You took particular notice of 2 papers by Chatterjee et al. And Feinstein et al. In the introduction, you and your co-authors call them intriguing exploration play concepts. What intrigues you about what these authors postulate?
Yeah, so these are intriguing papers indeed, because they represent exploration ideas that came through fundamental geologic thinking. The paper by Chatterjee et al. is based on the onshore Barmer Rift Basin located in northwest India. And several major discoveries have been made within Paleocene age fluvial sandstone reservoirs in this basin. And to the point, this basin is considered relatively mature for exploration, as as almost all reasonably sized structures in it have already been drilled. But these Paleocene river systems drain into lower lying inland lakes. And so Chatterjee et al. Argue that a deep water lacustrine turbidite system may exist within them, making stratigraphic traps a possibility. They actually trace the evolution of the Rift Basin, starting from a regional scale and working their way to the prospect scale, focusing on interpreting environments of deposition. They work the seismic data to identify turbidite geomorphology and then to distinguish between reservoir and seal faces. And in the end, this has led to the mapping of prospects with assessed in place reserves of about 1 billion barrels. Now, to the paper by Feinstein et al., this is about the famous Deccan traps, the huge volumes of late Cretaceous age basalt flows that are exposed in the western parts of India. Specifically, their work tries to establish a temporal and genetic equivalency between these onshore exposed traps and the basalt flows that exist in the deep water areas off the west coast of India. And vintage seismic data from these offshore areas do show the top of the basalt, but within it and below it, images are transparent. So Feinstein et al. Described the use of modern marine seismic acquisition and processing technology that now produce images of the subbasalt section. From an exploration perspective, their paper traces the evolution of a subbasalt Mesozoic rift section that developed from the time that India broke apart from Madagascar and drifted northwards over the Reunion mantle plume, which most people believe caused the extrusion of the Deccan basalt. A working hydrocarbon system within the Mesozoic subbasalt section is already proven by wells that have been drilled through the Deccan basalt in the shallow water Kutch Basin in the northwestern coast of India. So by extrapolation and through fundamental geologic reasoning, their work points to the exploration prospectivity of the subbasalt section in these deep water areas off the west coast of India.
Going further on this particular topic, Chatterjee et al. Explores a prolific basin for hydrocarbons, whereas Feinstein et al. Focus on unexplored basins. Even though the focus of their papers differ, do you see similarities in the techniques and geophysics they propose to find hydrocarbons in these two different areas of interest?
Well, one similarity that I took away is the value of going back to the basics of geology for exploration work. Both groups did that to make their individual cases for the exploration potential of their different basinal settings. They traced back the structural and stratigraphic evolution of the respective target sections to establish prospectivity. The other similarity is in their strategy to upfront select suitably prepared seismic data for their different interpretational objectives. In Chatterjee's work, for example, the emphasis was on appropriate processing of seismic data for quantitative analysis to distinguish depositional phases, while in Feinstein's paper, it would be seismic acquisition and processing methods that enable imaging through a basalt section.
Harsvardhan et al. Highlight the revitalization of a mature gas field in the Cambay Basin. While oil was established early in exploration drilling due to poor seismic imaging, the field's potential had not yet been realized. So, how did these authors successfully reach this potential for the Lakshmi field?
So this work would be of interest to field development geoscientists, and actually more than to asset teams that are working development projects, because it highlights the value of stepping back for a fresh look at a mature producing asset with all of its cumulative data and learnings. So this paper is about the Lakshmi field in the Cambay Basin, which is in the western part of India. The field produces from two stacked Miocene age reservoir sections, a shallower gas bearing section where the main production comes from, and a deeper oil bearing section. The oil bearing sands were not the focus during the early development stage of this field because they are spatially discontinuous and thin. They're present in some wells, they're absent in others. So very difficult to predict them pre-drill. And to make things worse, the overlying gas section attenuates the seismic image of the deeper oil section. So recently, the production from the field had plateaued. And in the meantime, there have been advances in seismic processing technology. So the asset team decided to investigate whether they could better define these discontinuous oil sands in seismic data. So they reprocessed the seismic data using a method that quantifies and corrects for the gas attenuation effect. Their results delineated the discontinuous sands in the oil-bearing section. And based on this work, several successful wells have since been drilled into these sands. The field's life has been extended, its reserves have increased, and production has doubled. So a good story.
We mentioned earlier there were 8 papers in the special section, even more submitted. Did you find in editing this special section any common themes that stood out to you?
Yeah, and through the many papers that unfortunately couldn't make this special section, but one theme that threads through many of the papers in this section is the integration of varied disciplines. Uncertainty is the nature of the beast when we deal with the subsurface, and it is an axiom in our business that bringing together information from different sources tends to shrink uncertainty. And many of the papers in this section do just that by integrating information from geophysics, from geology, petrophysics, geomechanics, reservoir engineering, and in some cases even calling on analogs to solve particular problems.
What surprised you about India's oil and gas sector in reading these papers?
I was struck by the heterogeneity of the basinal settings and reservoir types that are currently being worked in India. Everything from plastic reservoirs in rift basins to shelf margin limestones to fractured basement reservoirs. So quite a variety. The other striking thing, I suppose, is the use of state-of-the-art geoscience technology, be it in seismic acquisition and processing, in quantitative seismic interpretation, in geomechanical analysis, or in fracture modeling. It really says something about the companies operating there, that they are willing to invest in these latest technologies and provide the related training to their staff.
For geophysicists not working in India, how would reading these articles help their own research and exploration?
Well, Andrew, I think there's a lot of value to be gained here. With 8 papers, an obvious benefit is the knowledge that one gains of different basins in India, their geology, and the kinds of data available to interpret that geology. So that would be of interest, for example, to companies that are considering opportunities in India, or to academic institutions pursuing research. And the other, of course, would be just the exposure that readers would get of good examples of the application of geoscience technologies and workflows to solve problems in exploration and development. Tight reservoirs, for example, are a case in point in this special section.
Is there any final words you would like to leave our listeners with on this special section?
Yeah, I think that readers would really benefit from the variety of geologic settings that are covered in this special section, and some of the innovative thinking and workflows that were implemented, and the application of modern technology to solve problems in exploration and development.
Well, this has been a pleasure. Thank you for your time and volunteering on working on this special section and for talking about it with me today.
You bet. Thank you, Andrew.
Please share this episode with a friend, colleague, or manager that would enjoy hearing this episode. Your recommendation is the single best action you can take on behalf of SEG's podcast. Go to our website at seg.org/podcast to find all our episodes and learn how you can subscribe for free directly on your phone. Original music by Zach Bridges. This episode was hosted, edited, and produced by me, Andrew Geary. The SEG podcast team is Jennifer Crockett, Ashley Rodriguez, Allie McGinnis, and Mick Sweeney. Thank you for listening. This is Seismic Sound Off, signaling off.